Hi, my name is Lisa Goldman Rosas, and my talk is entitled Engaging Ethnically Diverse Midlife and Older Adults in a Multi-Level Participatory Physical Activity Intervention, Evaluating Impacts Using Ripple Effects Mapping. I have no disclosures. We conducted ripple effects mapping within the context of the Steps for Change trial. So first I'll start by describing the trial design. Then I'll talk about our methods for ripple effects mapping, which you just heard about. I'll share our results and I'll finish up with some conclusions, limitations, and of course, next steps. We used ripple effects mapping within the context of the Steps for Change randomized controlled trial. So the Steps for Change trial was a cluster randomized trial of affordable housing sites. The affordable housing sites were for midlife and older adults. We randomized 10 affordable housing sites into two study arms. The first arm, participants received, or the older adult residents received, Active Living Every Day. Active Living Every Day is a 6-month group-based physical activity intervention facilitated by a coach. The second arm also received Active Living Every Day and then engaged in what we call Our Voice. Our Voice is a participatory process whereby the residents or citizen scientists collect data about their neighborhood using a mobile application, and then they use that data to advocate for changes in their housing site or neighborhood to increase or improve their opportunities for physical activity. There were two primary outcomes in this trial. First, at the individual level, minutes of moderate and vigorous physical activity at the 24-month follow-up. And the second was at the community level, where we conducted audits of walkability and resources for physical activity. Now I'll talk a little bit about how we used ripple effects mapping within the Steps for Change trial. So we conducted 4 ripple effects mapping sessions that I'll share today at 4 different housing sites. 2 of those were housing sites that received the Active Living Every Day intervention alone. The other 2 received Active Living Every Day and Our Voice. We invited all of the older or midlife and older adult participants at each housing site who were in the trial. They could invite spouses or friends, and then we also included key stakeholders such as the intervention staff and the housing site managers. Okay, there were 4 total parts of the ripple effects mapping sessions. So the first part included appreciative inquiry interviews. This is where we paired up participants into groups of just 2. They interviewed each other and asked the following 4 questions. What was a highlight, achievement, or success you had based on your involvement with Steps for Change? What unexpected things happened as a result of your involvement? What connections, could have been new or deepened connections, with others have you made as a result of Steps for Change? And then finally, what challenges did you encounter and how did you overcome them? The second part, participants reported back on their interviews, and we used XMind software to map the ripples or outcomes as participants reported back. Following the ripple effects mapping sessions with the group, we also conducted individual interviews, for example, if key stakeholders weren't able to attend. And we used the same appreciative inquiry questions and added their ripples to the map. The last step was to take the map back and ask participants if it reflected what we had discussed during the session. All right, following the data collection for ripple effects mapping, we got to analyze the data. So the first step was grouping the ripples into similar outcomes. This started during the session. We were able to identify common outcomes that participants were reporting. And then we continued to group the ripples after the session was over. The second step was to download those finalized maps from XMind into Excel. And that allowed us to code or categorize each of the ripples that were reported. We categorize the ripples according to levels of the socio-ecological framework. We chose 4 levels: individual, interpersonal, could be about the group or their family members, neighborhood or community level, and then finally policy or built environment level. Finally, we analyzed the data both quantitatively and qualitatively. Quantitatively, we looked at the average number of ripples in each level by study arm. Qualitatively, we did a content analysis of the ripples, both by the group to outcomes and by the socio-ecological level. Across our 4 sessions of ripple effects mapping, as a reminder, we did 2 sessions with the group that received active living every day alone and 2 with those that received active living every day plus our voice. So you can see the number of participants we had per session, and then the spouses or friend, only 3. You can see that the participants were primarily midlife and older adults, female, and primarily non-Latinx white. All right, now I'll give you a look at what the ripple effects maps look like. This is a simplified map, so you only see a few ripples per common theme. So the common themes are in the boxes. You can see increasing physical activity tracking was one of the common outcomes noted. Increasing physical activity, improving health outcomes, challenges and solutions, and increasing social connectedness. Those boxes are in red. You can see in the peach boxes, there were 2 outcomes that were reported only in one of the study groups. So for example, in the study group that received the active living every day and our voice, they had an outcome theme that was impacting community and policy change. Now, the participants in the active living everyday alone arm also had an outcome that was only reported in their group, and that was doing activities in the community. The map itself is usually much larger with many more ripples, but this gives you a chance to see the common outcomes that were reported across the 4 sessions. In this graph, you can see the number of ripples mentioned per level of the socio-ecological framework. So individual, interpersonal, community, and policy built environment along the x-axis, and then the number of ripples along the y-axis. The gray bars are the participants that received active living every day alone, and the red bars are those that were in active living every day plus our voice. So the main message here you can see down on the right-hand side in the policy and built environment level, those outcomes were primarily reported by those in active living every day plus our voice. The community and interpersonal levels were similar across study arm. And at the individual level, there were more participants who, more ripples that were mentioned at the individual level in the active living everyday arm. Now I'll give you a flavor of what some of those ripples were by the outcomes that I talked about just a minute ago. So you can see increasing physical activity tracking, increasing physical activity, improving health outcomes, and increasing social connectedness were some of the outcomes that we identified in the ripple effects maps. You can see the quotes that participants said for each outcome, and then how we categorized or coded each of the ripples by the socio-ecological level. So I want to focus on increasing social connectedness. We had the largest number of ripples across all study arms in the increasing social connectedness outcome. So you can see here 2 exemplary quotes. For example, we formed a coffee club and met outside of the group, outside of the intervention. Someone also said it gives you strength to stay involved and not give up on the things you are doing in the community. These were the 2 outcomes that were only mentioned in one of the study arms. So first, impacting community and policy change. That was only mentioned in the group that also received our voice. So as an example, got sidewalks repaired. Now more people can use the sidewalks and we can walk to shop. And then the other one, doing activities in the community, only mentioned in the active living everyday group. And someone said, by walking around the neighborhood, I got to know people working at the coffee shops, the mailman, and started pointing out graffiti and other issues in the community. So we have two primary key findings. One was that social connectedness was a strong motivator for adults to stay engaged in the physical activity intervention. And that was true across study arms. The other one was that the study arm that engaged in our voice resulted in greater built environment and policy changes. This has implications for thinking about how to increase intervention effectiveness in the future, as well as implementation and dissemination efforts. Now, of course, the small number of participants in the ripple effects mapping sessions may not represent the target population of diverse midlife and older adults. It's also possible that the appreciative inquiry focused only on the positive things, although we did include a question about challenges and how they overcame it. Our next steps are to use ripple effects mapping at multiple time points across the trial. So, for example, midpoint and endpoint. That can help us to understand how ripples might change or evolve over time. That can help us to optimize the intervention based on those findings and then use them to inform dissemination efforts. Thank you.